The unspoken seat. They say weddings weave families closer, don't they? A beautiful thought. But sometimes they simply illuminate the quiet chasm that's grown between you. I remember the pink dress, saved for just such an occasion. The banana bread, baked with his favorite recipe. Its scent filling my kitchen as it once did his. Even my cardigan, with those tiny pearl buttons Owen used to tease me about, saying I looked like a TV mom from the golden age. Yet, as I stepped into that grand wedding hall, a knot tightened in my stomach. No one had saved me a seat near him, not even a single chair. In that precise moment, something within me irrevocably shifted, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this small, quiet shift would redefine everything. Upper Michigan in spring holds a particular kind of quiet. It's not the peace of solitude, but the hush of being forgotten. My home, nestled beside a still lake, is surrounded by whispering pines and echoes of memory. It's just me now. Mark, my husband, passed 4 winters ago. Owen, our son, visits less and less, but I always tell myself that's how it should be. Young people build their lives, don't they? That's what we raise them for. My days had settled into a slow rhythm. Morning banana bread, the local paper over lukewarm coffee, and watering those stubborn tulips out front that stubbornly refused to bloom on my timeline. Sometimes I'd watch the mail truck, hoping it would pause, and sometimes I'd pretend I wasn't hoping for anything at all, just like someone else down the road, I imagined. 3 weeks before the wedding, Owen called. His voice buzzed with an unfamiliar excitement, almost a distraction. Lauren, he said, was her name. They were planning something simple, but elegant. His words trailed off, a subtle hint that my input wasn't needed. He didn't ask what I thought, or what weekends worked for me. Do you need help with anything? I offered, a desperate olive branch. Not to worry, Mom, we have it all handled, he replied, a polite chuckle in his voice when I offered to make the rehearsal dinner pie. Hanging up, I just stared at the phone. A feeling settled in my chest, a truth I couldn't voice. I was a guest in a story I believed I had co-authored. Still, I chose hope. I picked out the dress, cleaned the porch until it gleamed, even rehemmed my coat sleeves. A foolish part of me truly believed this wedding might, just might, bridge the growing distance between us. The uninvited agenda. The most profound losses rarely announce themselves with shouts or slamming doors. They arrive in silence, in small, polite brush-offs that feel like 1,000 tiny cuts. A quiet that follows you into bed, making you question when you cease to be needed. The wedding resort, 2 hours south, was breathtaking. Timber beams, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. Lauren's modern, timeless vision, Owen had said. I arrived early, a lifetime habit. My pink dress, pressed and perfect, soft pleats at the waist. Hair pinned back, a touch of light lipstick. The very picture of a proud mother on her son's biggest day. I walked into the lobby alone. The girl at the front desk, all bright smiles, handed me a name tag that simply read, Sylvia Hartley. No mother of the groom ribbon, nothing like the bride's family wore. I clipped it on, a silent badge of my diminished role. Inside, laughter swirled around clusters of guests. Waiters glided by with champagne, offering tiny, expensive canapes. I spotted Owen and Lauren near the front, a vibrant constellation of unfamiliar faces around them. He didn't see me. A young man in tight slacks and a headset, a planner, waved me to a table near the back corner. I glanced around, groom's coworkers, bride's extended family, maid of honor's parents. My small card, simply Sylvia, offered no title, no belonging. I sat between a home insurance salesman and an alpaca farmer from Vermont. Polite, certainly, but neither had ever met Owen. They talked across me most of the night. During the toasts, the microphone passed to Lauren's father, her brother, then her college roommate. Jokes about tequila shots, summer camp memories. At one point, someone asked when the groom's mother would speak. Lauren laughed lightly. Maybe later, she said, moving on. Dinner arrived, plated in quiet. My chicken was dry. The butter roll sat untouched. No one at my table finished their meal. The lemon tart, fancier than it tasted, left a bitter aftertaste. Owen never approached my table. Not once. He danced with Lauren, then her mother, then someone's aunt. I smoothed my dress, adjusted my posture, smiled at a photographer who passed me by twice without raising his camera. By the end of the night, I was still sitting there, surrounded by empty plates, the room emptying around me. I folded my napkin slowly, tucked it under my glass rim. No goodbyes. No one noticed when I left. A week later, Owen called. "Dinner, just us," he said. "Lauren's out with friends." His voice was too cheerful, too measured. He was trying to sound casual, I realized. "I'll be there," I said, no questions asked. That evening, I put on the cardigan I wore when I brought him home from the hospital, still soft at the wrists. I baked his favorite oatmeal cookies. The drive down was silent, the sky a flat, gray canvas that hinted winter still lingered. His new house sat in a pristine neighborhood, all trimmed hedges and matching porch lights. He opened the door with a quick, polite smile, a brief, almost there hug. The kitchen was through the hall, but dinner wasn't ready. Instead, a table for two, an uncorked bottle of wine, and a neat stack of papers meticulously clipped, with a blue pen resting diagonally on the top page. He poured me wine, complimented the cookies, his voice strangely rehearsed, like he was reading from an invisible script. Then he gestured to the papers. "Just for peace of mind, Mom, in case anything ever happens to you. It'll make things easier. A standard durable power of attorney. Everyone's doing it." His words were distant, practical, devoid of emotion like a weather report. I nodded, reached for the packet. The first page was dense with legal jargon, but the meaning beneath was painfully clear. Financial authority, real estate management, full access, immediate effect, no expiration. It didn't say son or family. It said agent. It said authorization. It said control. He smiled, no rush, but the pen was already uncapped. I noticed the empty plates, no scent of cooking. Just wine, just paper, just a silent demand masked by a friendly tone. I placed the packet back down. "I'll take it home, Owen. Look it over carefully." He nodded once, eyes darting from my face to the pen, then back. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes. Quiet reckoning. We spoke of nothing then. The weather, the neighbor's new fence, some show on cable I didn't recognize. When I stood to leave, his hug was even lighter than before. In my car, I didn't start the engine right away. My hands rested in my lap, the foil-wrapped cookies beside me. The porch light clicked off behind me, efficient, automatic. Just like the dinner.at home, I didn't bother changing. I sat on the couch, coat still zipped, my hands feeling alien on my lap. The house was too quiet, even the kitchen clock seemed to hold its breath. I wasn't sure if I was breathing. Then, slowly, I stood and descended into the cold, aching air of the basement. At the far end, behind the laundry machine, tucked beneath a shelf of paint cans, was a small metal box. I hadn't opened it since Mark died. He'd always said if anything happened to him, I'd find what I needed in there. I'd never had reason to look, but tonight, something urged me forward. The lid creaked open. Inside, everything was meticulously organized, just as Mark had kept it, neatly stacked, labeled folders. At the very bottom, a letter in his handwriting, my name on it. My chest tightened. The letter was short, a single paragraph. He knew I wouldn't ask for help, even if I needed it. He'd set things up so I'd never be trapped, never dependent. "Don't tell Owen," he wrote. Not because he didn't love him, but because he knew how the world worked. Money changes people, and sometimes it simply reveals who they already are. The files listed 2 accounts in my name, an investment portfolio I never knew existed, stock options, mutual funds, and an annuity tied to a small property in Texas. Over $7 million. I stared at the number, closed the folder, opened it again, wondering if I'd misread. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief. It was something heavier, a secret too vast for the room. I sat on the cold basement floor, the metal box open beside me. The deepest weight wasn't the money, but Mark's foresight, his quiet protection. He had seen something coming before I ever did, and in his own silent way, he'd given me the one thing I needed most, not safety, not wealth, but choice. I locked the box, stood slowly, my legs stiff, hands trembling with something more than age. Upstairs, I turned off every light but the kitchen. At the table, I laid out Owen's papers and a blank notepad. I began to write. Not what he wanted, but what I had to say. The phone rang 2 days later, mid-morning. I let it go to voicemail once, then picked up. Owen's voice, smooth, careful. Checking in. Had I looked over the papers? Yes, I said, my voice steady. A pause, a beat too long. No rush, he said, but it would be good to get things in order, just in case. What did he mean? He rambled about planning, being practical, protecting me, his words circling without landing. A story on the news about a woman losing access after a stroke. His friend's mother forgetting passwords. A list of concerns that reeked of strategy. When I remained silent, he cleared his throat. Just want what's best. Then the edge returned. If I wait too long, it might be harder to set things up. Smart thing would be to sign now, while everything's simple. I stared out the window, watching a squirrel dart into a bare bush, feeling a sharpness settle behind my ribs. I'll think about it, I said. Fine, he conceded, adding that Lauren had found a financial advisor to make everything smoother, someone they'd be happy to set up for me. I hung up. My cereal, forgotten, turned soggy. I couldn't move. I thought of sleepless nights with a sick child, driving 5 hours in a snowstorm just to bring him a spare tire. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because that was love. And now he saw me as a transaction, a logistical hurdle. The house felt smaller, the silence tighter. I poured the cereal down the sink. Then, I pulled Mark's manila envelope from the drawer by the fridge. It wasn't just protection yet. It was the last piece of something he built for me. And now, it was time I built something for myself. Not out of anger, but because even love has its limits, and I had finally reached mine. A new foundation. It took 3 days to decide. Not from uncertainty, but from a need for the silence to hold meaning. My next step wouldn't be born of fear or pride, but from a profound knowing of what was being asked and what I could no longer allow. I found Carol's number on an old birthday card. She'd been a trust and estate lawyer, retired now. Years had passed since we spoke, since her husband died. But I remembered her words. The quietest women often leave the most permanent marks. She picked up immediately, her voice older but still sharp. I told her everything. She just listened. Then, simply, we should meet. No fuss, no judgment, just coffee and clarity. The next afternoon, at her kitchen table, a cozy space filled with quilts and books, I handed her Mark's envelope. Her eyes moved swiftly over every line. A woman who had seen too many things too late for too many people. She looked at me when she finished. You have more power than you realized. The money's protected, the investment strong, the legal standing solid. But only if you keep it that way. Did I want to trust? Yes. Who to name? No one. Not yet. Maybe never. She nodded. Then she asked for Owen's papers. I pulled them from my bag. She flipped through them, unflinching. Aggressive language, she said. Immediate authority, sweeping access, no oversight. These aren't documents written to care for someone. These are written to absorb someone. We rewrote everything. Transferred the accounts into a private trust, under my full control. Access locked behind unbypassable conditions. Carol added a medical clause requiring 2 independent physicians to confirm any loss of capacity before authority shifted. She handed me a pen. I signed slowly, deliberately, not from nervousness, but because it felt like drawing a boundary I should have drawn years ago. A simple line across paper that declared, I am not invisible. I am not a convenience. I am not yours to manage. Carol slid everything into a thick folder. Keep it somewhere accessible, but not obvious, she advised. I tucked it in the cabinet beneath the sink, behind a box of dishwasher pods no one ever touched. Driving home, the air felt different, brighter. Not lighter, but sharper, like I could finally see the true shape of my life. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like someone's forgotten parent. I felt like a woman with a spine and a choice. The silent understanding. The invitation came via text. Owen wanted to try again. A proper dinner. Just us. No papers. No pressure. I waited a few hours before typing back one word, sure. I didn't tell him I wouldn't be alone. Carol met me a block away, parking her car across the street. She'd wait, she said, and step in if needed. I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. I'd learned the quiet strength of stillness. Owen opened the door, a warm, casual smile. Button-down shirt, socks without shoes, a subtle reminder of the barefoot boy who used to run through our hallway. The kitchen smelled of garlic and roasted vegetables. Real food, this time. Bread on the table. We sat. Small talk first. Had I been reading anything good? I mentioned a mystery novel from the library. He nodded, but didn't ask about it, his eyes constantly drifting to the side table. Another stack of papers. Clipped, neat, familiar in their unspoken intent. When he finally reached for them, his voice softened, deliberate. I spoke to a friend who works in elder law, he said. They recommended a simpler arrangement. Nothing binding, just provisional. Just to keep things smooth. He slid the papers toward me. I didn't touch them. Instead, I placed my own folded document on top. Just the soft whisper of paper meeting paper. Then I took a sip of water. He looked down, confused, then unfolded it. A formal notice of trust execution. My signature at the bottom. Full transfer of assets into private legal protection. Revocable only by me. His face didn't change immediately, but his eyes did. Blinking more. His jaw tightened, as if he'd bitten into something sour, but was trying to smile through it. I spoke carefully. Owen, I appreciate your concern. I understand life is stressful and planning is responsible. But I've already taken care of mine. Everything is in place. Everything is final. He asked if I'd talk to someone. Yes, I said. A friend. Someone who understands what it means to be prepared without being pressured. The room fell silent. He leaned back, his fingers tapping once on the tablecloth, then stopping. He no longer looked like a son. He looked like a man who had just run out of options. Carol entered then, smooth, polite. She smiled, greeted Owen softly, introduced herself. For dinner, she said, we'll be leaving now. I stood, gathered my coat, and followed her out without looking back. Outside, the wind was sharp. I exhaled slowly, the way you do when something breaks loose inside you. Not from anger, but from release. For the first time, I wasn't walking away hurt. I was walking away certain, earning the quiet. The first snow came early that year, thin and soft, tentative. I watched it fall from my kitchen window, just as I used to watch Owen wait for the bus when he was small. The world felt paused, not empty, just still. I spent the morning in silence, no radio, no kettle, just the quiet breath of the house. I lit a fire in the stove, wrapped a blanket around my lap, hands cradling a warm mug. There was no sadness, no joy, just a peace I hadn't known in years. A peace that didn't come from fixing things, but from knowing I didn't have to anymore. Later, I found myself writing a letter. Not to Owen, not to Mark, but to the woman I used to be. The one who believed love meant always saying yes. The one who thought being quiet kept things safe. I wrote to her gently, told her she was allowed to stop holding everything alone. Told her she could sit down now. The weight had been carried far enough. I sealed the letter and tucked it between the pages of a book I no longer planned to finish. Some stories don't need endings, they just need release. That evening, I baked a small cake, just one layer, just for me. I lit a candle, placed it at the center. No one sang, no one clapped. I closed my eyes and made a wish that wasn't for anyone else. It was for my own stillness, for my own beginning, for a life that no longer needed to prove itself. I opened my eyes and blew out the flame. The room didn't feel quiet. It felt earned. If this story has touched something quiet in you, perhaps a feeling you haven't spoken aloud in years, know that you are not alone. Every woman who has ever felt invisible carries a fire that cannot be taken. If you've walked away from something that only wanted to find you as a resource, only to discover your own voice waiting on the other side, I hope you carry that voice gently. And if you feel like sharing your own story, even just a piece of it, I'm listening. Because sometimes being heard is the first step back to being whole.